Hey everyone, welcome back to the Counteract Podcast. My name is Allison Lind. I am the host of the Thursday segment. I'm so excited to be joining you guys again this week. I actually have a really exciting announcement to tell you guys before we get into today's conversation. Counteract USA as a podcast is officially part of the Herzog Foundation. So for the first time ever, I get to say that this podcast was brought to you guys by the Herzog Foundation. And I'll tell you guys a little bit more about what they do later in this episode, but we're just so happy to have them as a sponsor. They're a network that's dedicated to educating Christians in raising family, living out their faith in America, and so much more. And we're just so honored to be able to bring our voice to their network. And so, yeah, we're brought to you by the Herzog Foundation. It's very exciting. Okay. I want to get right into the episode. Today, I'm joined by my amazing friend, Iulia. She's been a really good friend here in the city, and she's doing really important work, and I wanted to have her on today to talk about that. So, Iulia, could you tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Iulia Cazan. I work with the Center for Family and Human Rights. We are a pro-life and pro-family group active at the United Nations. And just a very quick context recap, basically at the United Nations, ever since the 1994, there has been a push to promote abortion as an international human right. So the Center for Family and Human Rights has really been at the forefront of the civil society movement to counter that narrative and to help diplomats really protect the value of life in the womb and protect this kind of rights. So we do research, we support delegates who share our view. We also do work on the family front. Obviously, we believe that the family is the fundamental group unit of society, and that it needs a special kind of protection. And I believe that in today's society, families have been left behind, kind of. So we are also promoting language and research that indicates that.
Wow, beautiful. And your position at CFAM, you also work under CFAM, you work for International Youth Coalition, right?
Yeah, so CFAM has a youth program, and with Daniela Garcia, who is in Colombia, we run the youth program called the International Youth Coalition. And that is basically, we offer a forum for young people to talk about issues that are controversial, that, we want to give them a platform where they could talk about the right to life and the importance of family and persecution of Christians. I shouldn't laugh because it's a very serious topic, but unfortunately, you could be heavily silenced, or not many publications offer you the opportunity to speak up. So we want to offer that, and then kind of build a coalition of like-minded people who want to affect change at the United Nations.
That's so beautiful. Guys, you should go look them up, especially if you're a young person. They have a blog, an Instagram account, all kinds of cool stuff. Yeah, and so the reason I wanted to have Iulia on right now was because we just finished, I volunteered with CFAM basically to go to the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN. Do you want to tell a little bit more about what that was and our experience with that?
Yep. The Commission on the Status of Women is a very progressive conference happening every year at the United Nations. And I guess the fundamental idea is a good idea. You want it's about women's rights, women's empowerment. And so it sounds great, but then when you look into it, you realize that they are trying to promote ideas that are kind of fringe. So, for example, they want to promote abortion as a fundamental pillar or element for women's rights and women's empowerment. And then you go into other controversial ideas. I mean, even their ideas and understanding of gender as, non-binary and so on and so forth, or not rooted in biology. So the commission itself is run by one of the UN agencies called UN Women. And that agency is guided by progressive secular norms and values. And so that streamlines into the commission itself. It brings hundreds, I believe in even thousands rather, feminists who would advocate and push for these ideas. There are hundreds of events, side events, and heavily focused. Many of them are focused on abortion, on the redefinition of family. You know, it doesn't have, they say, it doesn't have to be a mom and a dad. It can be really anything you want. And we should be embracing and celebratory about that. So we obviously, as a socially conservative group, we do present a different perspective. We want to say that we want to be in those rooms. We want to show that we exist, which is just such a weird thing because the United Nations really is supposed to be representative of all the countries, all cultures, systems of thought, philosophies, theologies, but you would often find that it's actually, unfortunately, a big echo chamber where the prevailing narrative is the only accepted narrative, and that is the progressive secular one.
Yeah. I found it really interesting as someone who's kind of grown up, like, you know, most of my information about kind of the woke ideology is like stuff that I see online. I encounter a lot of it in the city. I think that's just kind of a given. But to actually encounter it in a place of government, sort of, was really interesting. I feel like some of the things that they talked about, I was like, wow, like you're really saying the quiet part out loud. I was shocked that so CFAM is considered by the UN like an anti-rights organization. And I mean, where do we even begin with CSW? Like, what was the most shocking part of this CSW for you as someone who, you know, does this kind of every week?
Yeah. Well, and just to clarify, when I say, I think it's important to distinguish between the UN General Assembly and UN bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally, the UN General Assembly is a forum that brings together representatives, diplomats from 194, I believe, member states to deliberate, to discuss, negotiate documents. And that is a pretty democratic system. It functions on a one country, one vote basis. Okay. And so you do have a representation, really, as long as countries feel, free enough or empowered enough to speak up and defend their own sovereignty, then you do see that there. So that is why, actually, there is no treaty, there is no like hard law document that includes references to controversial terminologies at the UN. You won't see abortion. You won't see, again, the reinterpretation of gender as meaning just so many things, or the family itself. It's a pretty conservative document because you need to have the approval if it's adopted by consensus by all countries.
Yeah. Okay.
But then you have the UN bureaucracy, and that's a whole nother thing that is run by ideologues, people who have embraced a specific. And by the way, I mean, even as a Christian, I do identify in a sense as someone who believes in a set of principles. So the difference, though, is that we would start with that, right?
Yeah.
On the other side, it seems like there's no recognition of the ideology being so prevailing in everything they do. So you would see the UN agencies, UN Secretary General and its staff. They do seem to subscribe to a secular, progressive worldview, and that is really guiding their whole work. My colleague Stefano Gennarini, who has been at the Center for Family and Human Rights for a very long time, long enough to really witness a lot of these developments, he says that UN agencies are really the boilerplate for progressive norms around the world. It's a mechanism that does not only immense research but affects change by operating in many different parts of the world. So that's a distinction I wanted to make.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
And then I think I forgot. You asked me.
What was the most shocking part of
Right.
CSW? Which that is like where the ideology, the think tank is happening, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well, actually, it was one of the parallel events. It was hosted by Catholics for Choice. Catholics for Choice, obviously, they don't recognize many Catholic church teachings, and they do table very what I would consider, and the Catholic Church, I believe, heretical ideas. So, for example, they promote abortion as something that is consistent with the faith, with the Christian faith. And to me, it was just shocking to witness the extent to which these people were really, really angry and agitated, and just really wanted to change that about the church or the Christian faith more broadly. I'm not entirely sure what their goal was, but I think it was particularly sad because they weren't really able to defend their position. So I approached some of them after the event ended. Actually, this lady who has been involved with them for a very long time, she was the president for years. She wasn't really able to provide a very reasonable argument why she is really doing what she's doing. Why is she trying to really this affect change by destroying, by disruption like that? Why doesn't she believe that, has she considered that maybe the Christian faith does say something about abortion or the importance of protecting the life? But that is just to say that I noticed that there are emotional arguments being made over and over again. But when you're getting to, let's sit down and have a conversation, it's a pretty empty plate, and it's a strange thing to witness.
Yeah. Okay, guys, time for a quick ad break. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, we have such exciting news. We are now a part of the Herzog Foundation Podcast Network. For those that are new to Herzog Foundation, basically, they're all about advancing Christian education and empowering families, educators, and leaders to boldly stand for biblical truth. Just like us, they believe in counteracting ever-changing political and cultural tides with grace and truth and unwavering faith. Through this partnership, we're even more equipped to have meaningful conversations about the issues that are shaping our generation. And that is always, of course, through the lens of Scripture. So what does this mean for you? Even more thought-provoking episodes, incredible resources, and a growing community of believers who are striving to make a difference. We're thrilled to be a part of the Herzog Foundation family, and we're just getting started. If you want to learn more about this group, you can go to their website, which is herzogfoundation.com. That is HERZOG foundation.com, and you can learn about their mission and what they're standing for. And ultimately, we can just keep standing firm in the faith together. So thank you so much, and let's get back to the episode. I did find it interesting, which actually I think you mentioned it first, and then I started to notice that they do center religious voices, such as Catholics for Choice, and they talk a lot about wanting to center religion and even reconcile faith with these ideas, but they only put those dissident factions on the world stage. I have so many questions about that, but why is it so important for organizations like you guys to go in and I don't know, is pushback the right word? Or yeah, I mean...
Well, that's what they call us. They call us the pushback that they need to push back against.
Right.
So they use something like, we need to push back to push forward.
Yeah.
One of those things you have to listen and your ears bleed for a second.
Yeah.
But, I would say that it is important for us to be in those rooms because maybe you won't change hearts and minds like in a second. But what I found was that in a room of 40 people, I remember attending this event exactly on this topic on pushback. And I presented a different perspective. I told them a little bit about my journey, of how I really subscribed to all of these progressive views at some point in my life, and how I changed my perspective, and how now I truly believe in that which I do. And I've seen many people who do so in good faith as well, but we are labeled as anti-rights, anti-women, the worst names out there, as I said during that event. And they at the end, someone approached me and she wanted to learn more, and she seemed receptive to at least hear my perspective. And I think that's a good thing. You want to have that kind of conversation, because I myself had those kind of conversations that ended up opening my eyes to a new perspective. Because again, these people tend to live in echo chambers. They have a caricatured image of who pro-life, socially conservative people are. And so to be there to lead by grace and to share this different perspective, I think it's valuable.
Yeah. I completely agree, first of all. And I thought it was so cool to, it truly was encouraging actually to know that there were people who believed that, even who weren't with like CFAM or International Youth Coalition, but to run into people and to see even side events, like the Holy See had one on trafficking and one on pornography, I believe. Is that correct? Or
motherhood.
You got yours. Sorry, yes. You go.
They had one on motherhood.
Yeah.
And then I didn't make it to the other one, but we had one. CFAM had one on trafficking.
Right, so CFAM was
pornography,
Yeah. And that was so powerful to me, because it was like the first time in the whole conference that I felt like real like reason and conviction were being shared. A lot of the ones I went to, they kind of used a lot of talking points, were very empty, like you said, and were very circular arguments, like repeating themselves back to each other, like you said, an echo chamber. And it was so encouraging to like be in those rooms where real people were giving like real statistics on trafficking, not only in the United States, but around the world and other countries, to address pornography as something that is kind of a scourge on humanity. That one, I was like, wow, that's kind of controversial. To me, it seems like, obvious, but they were kind of attacking, I say, like, hypothetically, they were actually very gentle and loving about it for the listeners. But they were kind of confronting that idea that it's empowering for women to be sex workers and to participate in porn and to do OnlyFans. And I don't know, it was very encouraging basically to be in those spaces. And it encouraged me to know that like there's Christians occupying that world, because it was very jarring for me, I think, to have such strong beliefs like being talked about.
You have this, because CSW was the beginning of a revolution, in a sense. So I do believe that many of the feminists did intend actually to change norms and to integrate abortion as an international human right and so on and so forth from the beginning of the Commission on Status of Women. Now, did they succeed? No, because, again, there was a declaration that had to be signed or a document by countries. And when you have that, as I mentioned at the beginning, you do have to have consensus. So that means the document will be more conservative. But I wanted to talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is a document that has been largely cited, and it has been drafted really at the beginning of the United Nations, and it drew on insight and different perspectives from all around the world, and they took an interest in that, right? In making sure that this document reflects everyone's or almost all cultures' ideas of what it means to have what it means really to have a flourishing society where people's rights are protected. So what are those rights, right? Right. And no one believed that this would be possible. This is documented in Mary Ann Glendon's A World Made New. She wrote a whole book about kind of the United Nations, the Human Rights Project, but she told that no one really believed that they could do that, right? How could you have consensus among so many different, really, worldviews? You have communists, you have Christian perspectives. So, and at the end, they did end up with a document that was consistent with all of those different perspectives. So, and that has been the document that we still have today from the United Nations. The problem is that they are trying to redefine terms to include meanings that were never really there at first, that the founders of the document would have never thought that they are human rights, so to speak. So that is the issue that we are facing now, is they are telling us we are anti-rights, but they cannot really point to a right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we are against, because we are not against any of those rights.
Right.
In fact, the Universal Declaration mentions the right to life. So we have a very good argument to say we believe that the right, life begins at conception. That's a human life. We ought to protect it. So if we are playing this game of, trying to reinterpret and see things in the shadows of the document itself, then we have a very strong case for that as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you feel like this kind of, you said it was like the beginning of a revolution, so to speak, and this kind of like ideological like pandering, have you seen that shape our culture? Like, are we, like, people who are not in the UN, the average person, do you think that we're affected by the conversations that happen on the world stage?
I think UN agencies have a lot of impact around the world, and it's one of those things where you think about the UN and you're like, oh, the UN, they must be right. They have our best interest at heart, and I believe that many of the people working there have good intentions. But the question is, how does all of this progressive secular norms end up being part of their programming? So you have agencies like, for example, you have UNFPA. UNFPA is a UN agency that promotes sexual and reproductive health and rights abroad. They understand abortion access as part of the sexual reproductive health and rights agenda. And so, when you have their programming in the developing world, they do a lot of normative work. So they want to change hearts and minds. They think that they are liberating people of their, these patriarchal beliefs that are very hurtful. But they confuse. For example, they would say that, as I mentioned, abortion access is an issue. So, sorry, I kind of rambled and I forgot where I was going.
No, you're good.
It
was the camera.
Okay, no worries.
I think affecting us, like the average person, UNFPA.
Yeah, so you have all of these agencies promoting all of these worldviews. So they are trying to change hearts and minds, and to some extent they are succeeding because they do have the what do you call it, the rubber band, like the UN rubber band, and a lot of people, and I myself included, I was very impressed by the UN when I first got to college, and I actually I wanted to support UNICEF, so I founded the UNICEF Unite chapter in my university. I was a UNICEF Unite youth representative in Philadelphia because I did believe in a lot of these values. But the problem is that there's just so much, they don't stop at the humanitarian aid, right? It's about promoting ideas and norms. And when there's no consensus on, okay, which norms are we promoting and which ones we are not promoting, that's the problem. Because from a social conservative, from a Christian perspective, we have so many different perspectives on on sex before marriage, on the importance of abstinence, and how that plays into, a decrease in pregnancies out of wedlock, and so on and so forth. So curriculum, sexual education, a different perspective that promotes abstinence, and instead of a sexual education that exposes children to basically educational material that is supposed to help them adapt better. But at the end of the day, there's just so many testimonies of people or children who grew up to realize that was not appropriate. They wish they were not exposed at that age to that kind of material. So there's just a lot of controversial issues that are really single-sidedly decided to be included in their programming. That is straight up problematic.
Okay. Wow. So how should the average Gen Z Christian perhaps approach things like this programming that's being implemented in the UN? Like, is there any good resources, like ways for us to educate ourselves, but also are we able to engage with this in any way like CFAM is doing?
So I would say that the UN gives the opportunity to nonprofit groups to show up at the UN and sometimes make statements during not negotiations but informal consultations with civil society, right? So before CSW, they had a session where they invited not only diplomats but also civil society. So that's where we showed up and we said, on behalf of a number of pro-life groups, we said we are very dissatisfied with the kind of censorship and, how you're treating conservative groups. So there's an opportunity to show up like that if you do have consultative status, for which you have to apply and be approved. And then other ways you can, learn more about what is happening. CFAM publishes 2 articles every week on what is happening at the UN, so you could subscribe. It's called the Friday Facts. You could do that on our website. Also, we have the International Youth Coalition, as I mentioned, the youth program. We do report on what is happening at the UN. Also, kind of, but it's not an article, it's more like a newsletter type. So you could learn like that through that resource. We also have an Instagram, so International Youth Coalition on Instagram. But I would suggest, my hope is that more and more conservative groups will show up and participate, because it's important and because we have a right to be there, because the United Nations should be a space that welcomes diversity of opinion. They do try to frame us as anti-rights, as standing up against their plans, but guess what? Their plans are not they don't have the consensus of the world, right? So they should kind of recognize that. They and it's very strange and bizarre, because you do have extreme regimes oppressing women that are really anti-rights. I mean, you have the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, to give an example, right? And then you'd have a pro-life group. You'd have a group like Counteract. You'd have a group like CFAM, International Youth Coalition, Campaign Life Coalition in Canada. Groups that really, they love women. We do love women. And it's just that we also love the life that's in the womb. And we want to make sure that we do not pass laws and, not pass laws, but we don't declare international human right, to kill an infant child and a preborn child, to declare that as a international human right. And for that reason, we are ostracized. We cannot enter the room. Our opinions, no matter on any other topics now, is very unfortunate. And so I recommend as much as possible to learn more, to get involved, because there might be an opportunity, and I am hopeful, not necessarily that, the UN agencies will change and so on and so forth, but that more and more people would be aware of this kind of sad side of it.
Yeah. Thank you. That is so encouraging. Do you have any other advice you would give to Gen Z Christians, maybe from a UN perspective, or even just as like you, Iulia, living in New York City, Christian conservative, like walking the walk? Is there anything you would encourage like young people who are listening to this podcast to do with their faith?
I would say prayer is a very big thing.
Yeah.
And it can really move mountains. And it can give you the kind of wisdom, clarity to see things rightly. And so obviously that paired with reading the scripture and making sure that you do know what God says about most things. And he had a lot to say about a lot of things. So I would say equipping yourself like that is definitely our armor.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do think that we should be informed, because to guard yourself against a threat, you first have to recognize it as a threat.
Yeah.
And you have to have the proper moral compass, the proper formed consciousness to understand it as such. So, and then I also recommend engaging in dialogue, engaging in discourse. As I said, I think it is important, and it can affect change, especially if it's led by God's grace and love. Now, there are moments, that doesn't mean you have to compromise, though. So there are moments where you do have to say a truth that it's harsh, probably perceived as harsh, probably perceived as, depending on who's listening. So I don't think we're asked to compromise on that, but the way we say it is in our control. And I think that's a very useful thing, especially in a space that's lacking that. Mm-hmm. As is New York City, as is the United Nations.
Wow. Thank you. That was so amazing. I think we're coming to a close on our episode, but do you have anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
Oh, not sure I do. But I think Counteract is doing a great job. I think you guys are platforming voices and people who are willing to ask questions that are countercultural, but I think worth asking, worth bringing forth. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Iulia. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for coming on the podcast today. Cool. Well, we're going to sign off then. Do you want anyone to follow your personal Instagram, or you want to just send them to IYC?
Sure. Either works. I mean, I would prefer IYC because that's where you would find more about the UN. We are Youth Coalition on Instagram. And then our website is the internationalyouthcoalition.com. If you cannot find us, because there are a bunch of international youth coalitions that do a bunch of different things, there's also the CFAM website, and that's where you could find us more easily. So, that's
perfect. Yeah. So that information will be in the description below. And as always, please review the podcast, give us a rating, leave a comment if you're on YouTube. We love the support and the feedback. It not only helps us learn how to bring you guys better content, but it also helps us stay ahead of the algorithm and not get shadow banned. So we love you guys so much. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming on the podcast, Iulia.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And another thing I get to say about Herzog Foundation is that everything in this podcast is brought to you guys from me as an individual and Counteract as an individual organization. Herzog Foundation does not directly represent all of our views, nor do we represent all of their views. They're just amazing sponsors for us, and we love that they are just giving us an opportunity to speak about the truth and the word of God and all that he's doing on the earth. So thank you guys so much for tuning in this week, and we'll see you next week. Okay, bye.